Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So today in this presentation I will discuss about pile foundations, like what are different piles of what different types of pile foundation and why we utilize pile foundation. So when we talk about pile foundation, it is basically a type of deep foundation which is basically utilized when the top portion of the soil is weak and basically there is a need to transfer the load to required depth where the soil is hard enough to take the load which is basically coming from the superstructure. So it is a type of deep foundation. Its length to width ratio is basically greater than 2. And when we move further, so here is a classification of piles are basically classified on the basis of their function as well as on the basis of their material properties. And when we talk about the function, piles are classified as end bearing piles, friction piles, compaction piles, tension piles, and anchor piles, sheet piles. And when we talk about on the basis of material, they are classified as concrete piles, steel piles, and timber piles, composite piles. Composite piles are basically made by the combination. So this combination can be of concrete and steel as concrete and timber as well. So these are the composite piles. Now end bearing piles. So as we see that its name indicates that it takes load at its end, so it is basically called end bearing pile. And the load basically is coming from the superstructure and the end is basically resting on a hard rock which is capable of taking that load which is coming from the superstructure. So this type of pile basically transfers load through its load tip. That's why it is called end bearing pile. And when we talk about the friction pile, it transfers load on the basis of skin friction between the pile surface and the surrounding surface. If you can look at this pile, you see that there is a friction between the pile surface and the surrounding surface. Greater this skin friction, greater the load this pile will be able to take. And we can increase this skin friction by increasing the depth of pile, by increasing diameter, and by making the pile surface more rough. Basically by utilizing all these aspects we are actually increasing the coefficient of friction, and that will basically increase the friction of this pile with the surrounding earth surface. So we can also group these piles to increase the load carrying capacity of these piles. And when we visualize the compaction piles are basically usually provided for the compaction of the soil. And these piles can be in the form of sand. We basically make a hollow inside of the earth in which we basically want to utilize these piles. So we put sand in those portions and then we fill in those portions. So these are basically utilized for compaction of the soil. That then after that we can utilize that soil for making buildings. So the compaction pile is basically, its name is indicated that these piles are utilized for the compaction. And when we talk about the tension piles, these are also called uplift piles. If you can see in the right figure here, it is mentioned that on the left hand that is a uplift pile. So the movement will act when this lateral load of wind will act on the top portion of this pole. It will try to uplift this structure on its base. So this uplift pile will basically resist this structure from lifting. So it is basically resisting the tension force which is created due to the lateral action of these winds. So it is basically a tension pile which is utilized to resist these type of tensions. So different reasons for the development of these tension forces can be scissor forces and hydrostatic forces, and these forces can create an influence which can hit this structure. In order to avoid this structure from lifting up, they basically utilize uplift piles. And sheet piles are mostly provided when we are doing an excavation and there is a probability of falling that fall into the trench. So basically provide sheet piles on those areas and for the coffer dams and the trench shooting and shore protection. Coffer dams are basically temporary structure which are constructed in water while we are going to build a structure inside water. So execution methods. When we come towards the execution, there are two methods. In driving method, we will basically utilize the force to drive the pile inside the soil, and when we will utilize that force, it will basically cause the displacement of that pile and displacement of that soil, and the pile will try to make its way through that soil. When we talk about the pouring method, we are actually removing the soil and then we are putting the pile inside that earth, and because there is a hollow volume available for us to put a pile inside that hole. So there are two methods: driving method and boring method. And when we talk about these methods further, they are classified as dropping weight, vibration, jacking, and jetting. In dropping weight, its name is indicating that we will basically drop a weight from a greater height. We will do these repetitions until and unless the pile penetrates inside the earth, and when we have achieved the required depth, then we will stop this operation. Basically, it is the weight is dropped on a pile head so that the pile is not damaged, and we basically provide a proper structure on the head of this pile. In the vibration method, we utilize vibratory hammers. So the vibrations basically allow this pile to penetrate easily. So it is mostly suitable for a non-cohesive soil like sand. In jacking method, basically we utilize jacking system to uplift our structure, and then we place a piece of pile, and then we basically try to uplift our structure. It is also called it utilized a technique which is called underpinning structures. So this is the basically technique which basically we provide short lengths of pile by jacking so that we can basically uplift our structure. So water jetting, we usually know that water has a great power. Water can basically cut a piece of metal if we provide its jet with a great velocity. So water jet is basically used to drive these piles inside the surface. So the greater the force of this jet, the greater the pile will drive inside the earth. So we have to basically this method has a limit effect on stiff clay and coarse gravel, because water will face a lot of difficulty to drive that pile through these stiff clays which do not allow penetration easily. So okay, this is the most modern technique of driving piles, continuous flight auger piles, and these are basically cast in place piles. So basically these are placed on these are casted on site, and basically auger is used to drill, and when auger basically drills, then we basically put concrete inside that hole, and then we basically put a steel mesh. So this method is environment friendly because it produces less vibrations in the ground as compared to other methods, and it is quick. So that makes it more environment friendly. So, the conclusion is basically that the type of pile that you are utilizing for a foundation and installation method depends on the investigation of the soil condition and soil. If soil is loose, and if soil is whether the soil is coarse, whether the soil is cohesive or non-cohesive. So on the basis of that, you basically make a pile, and you choose your driving method, and whether which method you will utilize for driving that pile. So thank you very much. Here is my Gmail if you want to ask any questions from me, and these are the references which I utilized for making this presentation. And thank you very much for paying attention.